Greeting and salutations. I am Lloyd, a producer at LCD Productions, and I have come to share this new series of visual audiobooks with you, the listener, the supporter, the viewer. Together we will go on a journey like never before, fly to new heights with Project Aerospace, explore new land and cityscapes with photations, even change the dimension of time through the power of time-lapse photography from live to tape. We'll even travel beyond the mind's eye into worlds captured and generated through animation from Thumbs United daily animation series. As we together go on these journeys filled with photography and theater of the mind, I hope you remember the core belief that we hold, that anyone can become the master of art, meaning that it is not some born skill what makes someone good at being creative. It is a desire to practice and spend time being creative that creates the master. I hope that these films, photography, and stories inspire you to set some time aside and practice some creativity. I believe if we all spend more time creating and being constructive, the world would be a better place, a more friendlier and fulfilling place. Thank you for coming. Let's begin this journey. The Girl Aviators and the Phantom Airship. Chapter 2. Suspense and Achievement. It was a week after Fan Harding's visit to the Prescott home on one windless, streamy morning when the pearl-gray mist still lay in the smooth hollows running back from the coast that the golden butterfly was wheeled out of her cocoon, so to speak, and dragged up the hillside at the back of the white-green sheltered cottage. Miss Prescott, a sweet-faced old lady whose cheek was still blooming despite the passage of the years, stood on the back porch of the house watching the progress. If Miss Prescott's face had been somewhat less cheerful than usual since her talk with Mr. Harding, all the clouds had been chased from it now. She watched as eagerly as a girl, while Roy and Peggy, aided by Jess and Jimsy, and two other lads, friends of Roy's from the village, dragged up the brand-new airplane up the hillside. The excited chatter and laughter of the young folk rang out merrily as they worked, for it was work to get the planes, light as it was, up the grade. Fortunately for Roy, had no desire of a crowd to witness his initial ascent into the new airplane. The Prescott house had some distance out of the village, and there were no near neighbors. The place had, in fact, once been a farmhouse, and although the acreage still was in the possession of Miss Prescott, it was not worked. The more ideal place for flying could not be imagined. Smooth slopes, unwooded, except in clumps, were all about. The north glimmered the sparkling waters of Long Island Sound, while the south stretched fertile farmland, devoted to crop-raising and pasturage. Very businesslike the young people looked as they hauled the monoplane up the hill. Roy and Jimsy wore leather puttees, trousers, fashioned somewhat like riding breeches, and leather coats. On their heads were caps of lantern material, well padded with the provided with a visage pierced with goggles. The girls wore shirt-waist outing skirts and sensible walking boots. Jess had on her Shakers motoring bonnet, in which she looked very captivating indeed. Peggy, glossy hair unadorned but tightly confined in a net, formed her hair covering. Both girls were all a tiptoe with excitement, for although Roy had experience with aeroplanes, and so, in a limited way, had Jimsy, this feature of the sport was new to them. At last the summit was reached, and Roy, after calling a halt, took a brief but comprehensive survey of the golden butterfly. This done, he climbed into the chassis, or body of the thing, and leaning over the machinery, he rapidly tested all the adjustments, and examined the lubricating device to see that all was in order. Everything appeared to be. "Well," said Roy, with some self-compliancy, stepping out of the machine, "everything seems to be for the initial flight of the golden butterfly. My lord and gentlemen, and ladies, if you please," put in Jess, in a voice that was vibrant with excitement, despite her endeavor to keep calm. "And ladies," added Roy, with a gallant bow in her direction. Peggy, in the meantime, like an anxious little mother fussing over dolls, had been examining the airplane once more. Suddenly she gave a little cry, The exclamation interrupted Roy, who was explaining with all great satisfaction that everything was all right. I've looked over it, and if there had been anything wrong with it, it couldn't have escaped my notice, he observed rather pompously. Oh, Roy, just look here. The spring of this landing wheel is all slack. This was the examination from Peggy that brought up Roy somewhat shortly in the midst of his self-confidence hurrying. By George, so it is, sis, exclaimed Roy, redeeming a little, while Lee Sidney, one of his chums, observed with a chuckle to Jeff's strokes that Peggy appeared to know as much, if not more, about the machine than did Roy. The springs soon tightened by means of a monkey wrench, but that had not prepared them all, realizing that if it had not been for Peggy's acute observation, a serious accident might have occurred. This done, even Peggy's anxious glance could not detect any other flaw in the machine. What time did that aviator fellow say he would show up? Then demanded Jimsy abruptly. He should be here now, rejoined Roy. I have half a mind to start anyhow. I can manage the machine, I am very certain. Oh, Roy, cried Peggy reprovingly, you know you promised Auntie that you wouldn't do anything until Mr. Hal Homer got here. All right, sis, put in Roy hastily. Don't be scared. I'll stick to my word. Hullo, cried Jimsy suddenly. There comes an auto now. So it is, exclaimed the others, as a black touring car came whizzing down the road below them. It soon halted, and a figure in leather garments which gathered legs aligned and hastened across the field toward the party clustered about the plane. The car was left in charge of a chauffeur. As Jimsy had guessed, the new arrival proved to be Hal Homer, the well-known cross-country flyer from whom Roy had taken some vacation-time aviation lessons. He's awfully good-looking, whispered Jess to Peggy, after introductions to the dapper young aviator had been extended by Roy. Oh, so, rejoined Peggy, with a toss of her head. Maybe you know someone who is handsomer? Questioned Jess with a mischievous side glance of her fine eyes. Peggy flushed under her fair skin, but Jess laughed with good-humored raillery. Jimsy surely is a good-looking boy, she said, if he hadn't a pug nose. A pug nose? Flared Peggy. Oh, yes, Jess, how can? Then she stopped short in confusion, while Jess laughed the more at her discomfiture. Young Mr. Homer lost no time in starting operations. He ordered his help to secure the machine to a small tree growing nearby by means of a stout rope Roy had brought with him. This done, the monoplane thus secured from flying away when her engine was started, he set the sparking and gasoline levers and threw in the switch. Roy and Jimsy, the latter acting under Roy's instructions, flew to the propeller. The Golden Butterfly being a monoplane, this was in the front of the machine. Be careful when you start to leap aside, warned Roy, or you might be beheaded. I never lose my head in an emergency, joked Jimsy. But just the same his heart beat, as did those of all of them but Hal Homer, as he and Roy started to swing the great shiny wooden driving appliance. Once, twice, 3 times they swung it round, exerting all their force. The 4th time they were rewarded by a feeble sigh from the engine and 60-horsepower motor. All at once, bang! Let's go, yelled Roy, jumping backward. Jimsy, in a hurry to obey, stumbled and fell backward in a heap. He rolled some distance down the hill unnoticed, before he succeeded in stopping his motion. In the meantime, the other, even Peggy, were too absorbed in the sight before them to watch Jimsy. Simultaneously with a sharp report, the propeller had whirled around swiftly. The next instant it was a mere gray blur, while a furious wind from its revolving blades swept the onlookers. Blue smoke sputtered out of the exhaust, mingled with flame, and the uproar was terrific. The Golden Butterfly, like a thing of life, struggled at her moorings. The rope stretched and strained, taut as a violin string, under the pull, but it held fast, and after a while the aviator Homer slowed down the engine and finally stopped it, after adjusting a misfire in one of the cylinders. As the propeller came once more visible and came to a stop, the boys broke into cheer, while the girls too voiced their enthusiasm. "Oh, Peggy, isn't it a darling?" cried Jess. "Aeroplanes are not usually called darlings," responded Peggy with an assumed severity. "But oh, Jess, it's a jewel, and I'm dying for a ride in it," burst Jess. "Then, if you will consent to live a little longer, I hope you have the pleasure of saving your life." Put in Roy gallantly. "Oh, Roy, I can ride in it now?" gasped Jess, while Peggy clasped her hands snugged close to her chum. "Well, no, hardly just yet," laughed Roy. "But after Homer has tested her thoroughly, I guess you girls can take a spin." "You know, I'm going to learn to handle one," declared Peggy, as Roy made off once more. "I know a good deal about the theoretical part of it already." "Well, theory wouldn't do you much good in a mile-long tumble," quoted Jess sagely. "Nonsense," rejoined Peggy. "Mr. Homer said one is as safe in an aeroplane if one is careful as in an auto." "Safer, I guess, the way that brother of mine drives sometimes," replied Jess. "He calls it burning up the road. But oh, look, they're casting off, or whatever it is you do when an airship, when you turn her loose. Oh." Scratching off her motoring bonnet, Jess began waving it furiously. While they had been talking, the rope had been cast loose, and now, with Mr. Homer himself at the driving wheel, in cap and goggles, the engine was being started once more. In a rapid of excitement, both girls stood breathlessly, so intent they were on the scene transpiring before them that they had noticed the approach of a second auto on the road below. From it, Van Harding had alighted and hastened up the hill, after parking his machine as if in fear that he would be too late to view the proceedings. A sneering look was on his rather handsome face, and he rapidly climbed the hill. He reached the position behind the two girls just as the aviators gave the signal to let go of the machine, to the rear structure of which Lem Sidney and Jeff Stokes were perspiringly clinging their heels, digging into the soft turf to steady themselves. As Mr. Homer's hand swung backwards and the downward they let go, instantly like an arrow from the bow, the monoplane, the work of Peggy and Roy, was off. How it shuddered across the hilltop. Blue smoke and flame shot from its exhaust. Its operator sat hunched over the machinery, looking with his goggles like some creature of the lower region. Peggy clasped her hands and stood a tiptoe breathlessly as it scuttered along. "Oh, will it rise?" she breathed, her color coming and going in her excitement. "I'll bet $10 it won't fly any more than an earthworm." Peggy turned swiftly, indignantly. Her color flamed, and her eyes blazed angrily. Jess, hardly less indignant at the sneering tone and words, also faced about. "Good morning, girls," said Van Harding, easily raising his motor cap nonchalantly. I came to see the ascension, but I'm afraid that it's going to be a descension." I think you're hateful to talk like that," cried Peggy, angrily stamping out her foot. "Our airplane will rise. It just will. I tell you, oh, graciously." She spoke off in confusion and stood aghast for a moment. The swiftly scuttling airplane had stopped from skittering over the grass and had come to an abrupt stop at a distance about 500 yards. Already the boys were running across the turf toward it at top speed. The girls could see Mr. Homer clambering out of the chassis as the machine came to a standstill. "Aha, aha, just as I thought," chuckled Van Harding victoriously. "That thing is a dead failure." Poor Peggy, tears in her eyes at this seemingly disaster, was stung fairly out of herself. She switched around on Van Harding with a suddenness that made her skirt fly out and that young gentleman step perceivably backwards. "It isn't a failure, Van Harding," she cried, with blazing eyes. "How dare you come here to sneer at us? We didn't invite you." "Oh, I could." But Jess had seized her arm and succeeded in checking Peggy's just in time. She whispered something to the indignant girl, who, with a scornful look at Van Harding, turned with her friend and ran lightly off toward the stranded airplane. "By Jove, I really thought for a minute she was going to slap my face," chuckled Van Harding to himself. "How pretty she is when she is angry. but I guess if she knew what I do about certain affairs, she wouldn't be quite so fresh with me. He cast a glance at the aeroplane around which the anxious people were now clustering thickly. If that thing is a success, he mused, as he strode off to join them, so much the better for me. I think I could use an airplane. I don't see why I should let Roy Prescott beat me out at anything. Ah, they started the engine again, and by Ginger, she's rising. She's going up. She's flying. The small irregularity in the working of the engine, which had brought the plane to a stop, had been quickly remedied. Even Fran Harding, little as she liked Roy, could not help but join. The small irregularity in the working of the engine had brought the plane to a stop, had been quickly remedied. Even Fran Harding, little as he liked Roy, could not help but join the cheer as the golden butterfly, swinging in an easy circle, began to climb higher and higher toward the fleecy clouds that freckled the blue dome above. As for Peggy, she jumped up and down, her enthusiasm till her golden hair was tumbling in a tangle about her pink shells of ears. Oh, goody, goody, she squealed in the intensity of her joy. Now it was Chapter 2. The next episode will be Chapter 3, The Clouds Gather. Thank you for experiencing this journey we have created here at LCD Productions. For more information on how to support these films and projects, visit photations.com/support. Fine art photography prints from journeys around the world can be purchased from photationsstore.com, and digital downloads of our photography and visual audiobooks is available for personal use. Commercial use is available at a different rate. Thank you for your time. I hope to see you here again.